Yeah, well, now let's move ahead to 1979, since that's our feature year today on Retro Lightning, the year for You're Only Lonely. Tell us about that album and about the track specifically.
I can tell you about both in a very short story. That song is actually written in about 73. When I used to go spend winters in Colorado on a very cold ridge in a little cabin that I used to rent from Stills. And I'm not sure why. It seems masochistic to tell people about it now, but when it would get really cold there, I'd leave warm Southern California and go up there and spend the winter and write. And I wrote this song for a girl, and it never seemed finished. It didn't have a last verse. So 6 years later, Waddy and I were putting together the songs for the album that would bear its name. We were calling the album White Rhythm and Blues then. And I was playing Waddy's songs. I must have played him half a dozen songs, and you know, I'm not really known for my up-tempo work. It wasn't in those days. And he said, gee, Jake, do you have anything that's, sounds like a single, maybe? And I said, I really don't know, Wad, but I got this thing that I wrote years ago in Colorado. It's real catchy, but it's not finished. And he said, well, play it for me. And so I played it. I said, it doesn't have a chorus or a bridge or even a last verse. And he said, I just shut up, play it for me. So I played it for him, and he just looked at me like I was mental, and he said, that's it, that's our single. And I said, well, but it doesn't have a last verse. And he said, so sing the first verse again. And I did, and
there
you're going
go.
to play it. That's what it sounded like, and it became the hit on that album, which was delightful. It was a wonderful fall in 79. I had 2 songs in the top 10 at the same time. Had that and Heartache Tonight by the Eagles. So
certainly.
Nice year.
Nice year. Well, let's hear what that year was like back then. J.D. Souther, You're Only Lonely back then. Retro Lightning on Lightning 100. J.D. Souther, then in 1979, You're Only Lonely. Well, let's fast forward to 1985 now. You disappeared out of sight. What in the world happened in 1985?
It would take a 6-week show for me to tell you everything that's happened between now and then, or all the reasons for what seems to be a disappearance. It obviously wasn't. I had, I wrote this stuff with Henley for the End of the Innocence album in 89 or 90, I think. The Heart of the Matter and If Dirt Were Dollars and Little Tin God. And a couple of years later, George Strait had, the record of The Last in Love, and then it had something on the Dixie Chicks album in 98, the Wide Open Spaces album. I just didn't want to tour anymore. I actually didn't want to make a new record because I didn't think I had anything fresh to say. And without criticizing anyone, and believe me, I'm not, I thought that there was an attempt to sonically update the sound of records by all the people that I'd grown up with to fit a sort of MTV 80s, early 90s kind of approach. And it without any criticism of it, it just wasn't what I was listening to at the time. I'd gone back to listening to a lot of late 50s jazz, sort of bop and post-bop, cool jazz, and a lot of the early country music that I really liked, sort of the off-the-wall Hank Williams stuff, and very early George Jones, and of course Dylan. Always, if you're ever stuck for thinking of a place to be as a songwriter, I just listen to some of Bob's stuff. It's like you can't write songs in the modern era without acknowledging that standard of quality that's there. It's like for a classical pianist, you can't play Bach without acknowledging the fact that Glenn Gould played the Goldberg Variations in 55. It changed classical piano playing, at least as far as Bach is concerned, for all time. And as Dylan and Jimmy Webb did for songwriting, those two guys are kind of the lighthouses of two different types of songwriting. And I just felt it was time to go home and woodshed, practice. Got out my horns, put both drum kits up in my studio, and actually made most of a country album with Waddy and Richard and Rick, the bass player, and we got most of what we were calling a Roadhouse country album done. And then I just didn't quite finish it. moved here, moved to Ireland, moved back here 6 months later, and I just got lonesome for hearing jazz, and I went out. I had this bunch of songs, this sort of nexus of these songs, which I'd started in Cuba in 1998, and they just seemed to grow towards this group, and I really wanted this sound, this kind of early Miles Wayne Shorter group sound that had a big concavity in the middle. It was roomy. It was soul, like soul music, you know, where when one person spoke, whether it was the singer, the horn player, or the piano player, that voice would be heard instead of trying to yell over 2 or 3 rhythm guitar tracks and overdub things over that. I wanted to build everything into it so we could all go into one room and play the music live and intimately and honestly, but still with a lot of power. So that's what we did. We rehearsed for a month. We played gigs for a month. And then we went into the beautiful Massenburg room at Blackbird and got the album live.
Did it. Great. If you're just tuning in, we're talking with legendary J.D. Souther in the studio with us today. He's got a show coming up at the Belcourt Theater this Wednesday night. You need to go see this show. Get your tickets at belcourt.org or selloutpresents.com. So we're here at the new album, or well, actually it's been out for a few months, If the World Was You. Mm-hmm. And I can see your jazz influences kind of coming out on this. There's you cover a lot of different genres and types of music on this album, complemented by a great band with
Fantastic.
Some great Nashville musicians. Tell us a little
Fantastic
bit about
that. The regular band is Jeff Coffin. He's Grammy-winning sax player who plays in Bela Fleck's band and now in Dave Matthews Band. Rod McGaha's the trumpet player, fabulous trumpet player. Chris Walters is the piano player. Jim White's the drummer. There's 2 Jim Whites. This is Jazz Jim White from Georgia. There's another Jim White who's great, who's an Australian drummer who plays on a lot of indie sort of alt-rock records, and he's great too. But this is who we call Jazz Jim White. And we have 2 bass players, Dan Emmel and Jim Mayer, both great. Jim's going to play this show here. And Bela Fleck played on this cut you're about to play. And it's just a fantastic group of people, and we're going to be recording this show, so it should be a blast because there's always a little extra tension and a little extra buzz that goes with a show that's going to be a record. So
definitely
I'm looking forward to it.
Well, let's listen to it. This is off the recent album, If the World Was You, J.D. Souther and House of Pride. Now.